Hi, I'm Claudia Jurmain. I'm Director of Special Projects and Publications here at Rancho Los Alamitos Foundation.
I'm Bill Wells. I was the exhibition designer for the restoration of the Barns project here.
Tell me about how this whole development began.
It is quite an epic story. In 1984, 85 probably, Pamela Seeger was hired as the executive director of Rancho Los Alamitos, and she came down here with the mandate that she was to do a master plan for the site. A foundation had been created. The city owned the site, but things had happened over the point in time where the family stepped back in and decided that some renovation, restoration, and preservation needed to occur on site, and they knew Pamela was the person to do it. So she put together a master planning team, and that team involved three components. One was architecture to preserve the ranch house, the historic barns. The second component was the landscape to preserve and do what was needed to restore the gardens. And the third component was our component. It was the interpretation of the site. And so she contacted myself. We were both had just finished a project at the Oakland Museum and Bill Wells to develop that interpretive plan for the site. And so after, what was that process, 4 years, perhaps, 3 years?
Yeah.
The master plan was created, and Pam stayed and continued to restore the gardens and restore the ranch house and create an institutional environment, and moreover created an award-winning identity. And then about 12 years ago, she asked me to come back down on site because it was time to implement the Barns area restoration as well as the Rancho Center. And that's the long and the short of it.
So, what is the scope of the project that the two of you oversaw? What is the scope of that? What does it include?
Well, I mean, we were the interpretive team as part of the master planning group, and initially that was how to explain and tell the story of the site and its importance and its context. We had the luxury of many, many years as this project worked its way out to begin to learn what that story was, and our roles, I think, expanded into every corner of this project, really. It was really about what's the public face of the rancho and what's the story it's telling, how is it being told, what are we not doing, what stories aren't we telling, and so I think, you know, other than architecture and landscape design and electrical and plumbing, you know, we were involved in just about everything.
It's a complicated site. You know, if you go to Mount Vernon, you know what the reason of Mount Vernon is. It has a dominant theme. But when we walked into Rancho Los Alamitos for the first time, it was more, oh my gosh, what is this place? And why did you come to Southern California kind of experience? So the process of understanding what the message was, what is the reality that this site, what is the story that this site could tell that no other place could tell? Because you're not writing a book. You're talking about the nature of the landscape. You're talking what emanates out of the place itself. Now that's very different than an academic story. And then secondly, how can you make that story occur in a way that will capture the imagination and the attention of the public? Because here, the mandate is in fact historic preservation. So you have that responsibility to protect what is, but also know that things change and that you need to create something new and refashion something new to tell a story that's never been told before in a way that's never been told before.
How did you go about that?
Well, I think Claudia was clearly in the lead here because she was doing the research and trying to find what were the important stories, and that took a long time and yielded a lot of unexpected results. And in the meantime, you know, the site was evolving, buildings were moving around, they were getting bigger, they were getting smaller. It was a real moving target. So while she was developing the thematic scope, we were trying to figure out how in the world we're going to tell it in this site that kept changing. I mean, this really is a place about change. And we finally ended up with a site that we could then integrate what she had researched into a public story. But it really was research-led. The site itself determined most of it, and what she was able to find was what led us to the solutions we came up with.
What were some of the interesting original documents or resources that you uncovered or discovered in the process of your research?
Absolutely. I'll take a step back and say that this site is its best asset and its worst liability is the site itself, because it stereotypes the place. It's beautiful, absolutely stunningly beautiful. It had a reputation because of linear history of being the old Bixby Ranch. People knew the names of the owners. Rancho Los Alamitos. So it was already being typecast, but once you started to dig into the Spanish expedientes, the actual documents from the Spanish-Mexican era, into the oral histories, into the ledgers over time from the 1870s and 80s, what you saw was there was a cast of characters and voices that actually had been silenced by this beautiful landscape. And the point of going back into the actual resources, which had been collected by many people over time, including Pam Seeger, Pam Young, the curator, meticulously gathering together those resources, what you begin to see was we have communities of people who have crossed this land over time, and they need to tell their stories by themselves. And the way you do that is to talk to them. And they talk back to you. When you're reading those letters, you're suddenly reading a letter and you say, oh my gosh, I see he's talking about something he wrote about in the ledger. Or he's using an expression or a way of referring to a group of people in the same way that I see the accountant writing about in the ledger. Or when we talked about the Native Americans, the Tongva who were here, bringing people from the community back here and saying, this is still Pavungna, you know it. Now it's time that everybody else know it also, and that this is not a linear story. These stories all coexist on the landscape at the same time, and the primary sources were the proof of that.
You had mentioned earlier that there was a woman, a volunteer, who did some amazing work. Can you just touch a little bit on that?
Yes, there were a couple of them. One was Marion Burton. She just passed away, and the other one was Beverly Miller. Probably back in the 60s, maybe, I think early 60s, they began gathering together all the children of the Mexican ranch worker families who lived right in Palo Verde down there, as well as the children of the Belgian tenant farmers who basically farmed in Rossmore area, east of here, and to the degree that they could, the children of the Japanese lease families. They contacted everyone and they did oral histories. And as a result of that incredible work, we have over 130 oral histories which document the period from about 1890 through the 1940s and 50s, and tell that story of California history when migrant labor was coming up because of the railroads in the Southwest from Mexico into Texas by word of mouth from families, come to this area. We know you can get a job at the Fred Bixby Ranch. And those families became part of an extended family. The sense of family has been here since Pavungna, the sense of life and birth. And indeed, they had families living and working down on Palo Verde. The kids ran across this hilltop. There was a school for them. Their words, their sense of home, and their contribution to building this place is documented in their oral histories. And for them, it's home.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time, and I look forward to the public getting in here in June to see it for themselves.
We do too.
Thank you very much.